Thank you all for coming out this afternoon, and I know we'll have some more folks kind of streaming in. It's such a beautiful afternoon out there. It seems a shame to be doing this indoors. But it's my pleasure to be here to welcome you to the second annual State of the College. I'm Doug Sherrod. I'm the new chancellor. Been here for all of 2.5 months in this role, but obviously was at the Medical Center for 23 years before that, and I've had a chance to meet a lot of folks over those years, but look forward to meeting all of you. A lot of familiar faces in the crowd, but a lot yet I haven't met, so I look forward to that. But I really want to thank you all for coming out to really have a conversation around the college. And as chancellor, I really can't overstate the importance of the college to the university. It really is the lifeblood of the university. And it is because of its size and its diversity, but really also because of the number of students it interacts with and because of the research that we do here in the college. And in a moment, we'll hear from Carl about his vision for the college going forward, and in particular, some of the new strategic plan elements that I know you all have been working on. And as I understand it, and I'm anxious to hear them, we're going to hear about actions aimed at student success, which is near and dear to my heart. I think student success, student experience is something that needs to really drive everything we do at the university, and also to talk about opportunities for undergraduate and graduate students, as well as scholarly and pedagogic support for our faculty, professional development support for staff, and really strategic growth for the college overall. And hopefully we'll have time after that to have some Q&A as well, to really have some conversation and get some feedback, and to really encourage you all to participate in that if you would. But I do want to just take a minute to say again and reiterate the importance of the college, and I say that obviously as chancellor, but also as a holder of a Bachelor of Arts degree in chemistry. That really the college is what gave me my career launch as well, and I think it is so incredibly important to our students and to our campus. And it certainly is the most diverse on campus, with 50 departments, programs, and centers, and as well as the schools of arts, the School of Literature, Language, and Culture, and the School of Public Affairs and Administration. So really, when you think about the depth and breadth of that and the products of all of that, we have really some of our most notable alumni came out of the college. When you think about it, we have Jayhawks that are at the United Nations, and we have Jayhawks in Hollywood, and we have Jayhawks that are artists, we have Jayhawks that are researchers, economists, inventors, best-selling authors, Jayhawks that have orbited the planet, and Jayhawks who are CEOs of major corporations, one of which I had a chance to spend time with last week, who was very proud of the fact that as the CEO of now his third tech company, carries a degree, an English degree from the college. So really, when you think about that, and we will have one visiting us very soon this fall, who's the president of a country. So you think about that diversity and how important it is that the college has played a role in training these leaders. It's so incredibly important, but also some of the most important scholarship and research comes out of the college as well, and really is helping us to address some of the grand challenges of our times when we think about poverty and climate change and health, and intergroup conflict and inequality. But equally important is really some of the vibrant types of scholarship that really make society a better place, things like art and history and science and literature and politics, and really all the elements that make up our society come out of the scholarly work of the college. And it's so critical in its contribution. So thank you for what you all do. We've got some students, it looks like. We have some faculty, a lot of faculty, some staff. I just can't thank you enough for what you do on behalf of the college and what the college does on behalf of the university overall. And I'm really looking forward to hear what Carl has to share with us today. So please welcome your dean, Dr. Carl Lejuez.
Thank you, Chancellor. It's really exciting to have you here, and it's great to be here today for our second annual State of the College. This is a time where we can talk about our accomplishments and our path forward and some of the exciting opportunities that we have. The Chancellor talked a bit about the liberal arts and sciences and what it does for society and how important it is to each of us and the responsibility we have in promoting it. But before we talk about that, I think it is also important to recognize there's been a lot of challenges. This has been an incredibly tough year. This has been a time where we've worked through a lot of hard things. It's a year where the budget issues continue to be problematic. They've affected us in a lot of impactful ways, particularly in our people. Having fewer of them, having less support, the ability to be able to think about how to move forward when it sometimes feels like we have that in our way. Beyond that, there's infrastructure issues. We look around and there's some exciting things happening with new buildings, but if you think about income inequality and what that means in terms of being those who are in the have and the have-nots, if you're in a building a facility where you don't have what you need to teach, where you don't have what you need to do some of the great research that you've been brought here to do, it may be a little hard to be excited about some of the other nice buildings on campus. Now I'll flip it in a bit and talk about the excitement of having those buildings, but I also think it's important to acknowledge that. Third, concealed carry is now here on campus, and we will take questions at the end, and I will be more than happy to get into some of the nuances of that. But I do think it's important just to at least to acknowledge how difficult this has been for many of us, particularly folks who feel vulnerable, folks who in their classes talk about and teach really difficult topics, other individuals who feel vulnerable because they look different or feel different. And this is something that we, as a community, will continue to struggle with. And then fourth, we have our continued need to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, our campus is not different than others, but we have a particular responsibility to our community to continue to take these issues seriously, to be proactive, and to never feel as if just because we've accomplished one or two things, that we don't have a lot of work to continue to do in this area. So there's a wide range of things that, as a community, we have had to kind of work through together and struggle through. Now, beyond that, there's the idea of how do we move forward and how do we think about being productive and being proactive. And I think one of the most important things as a leader is listening. And so starting with the State of the College last year, and if you remember the anonymous feedback we did last September or so, we'll do that again actually in a few weeks. We got hundreds of responses to that. And I will tell you, I was reading it over a break, and it was really hard to read. And this was an opportunity to get a sense of those hard things, but also a sense of how much our community cares about being here. How much, despite all that there's optimism and things to build on. And so while I think, again, it's important to talk about some of these challenges, there are a lot of positives and there are a lot of opportunities here. And so when we think about moving forward in that way, one of the issues that we were really struggling with at the time is what was going to happen next with the budget. And from the anonymous feedback, it was very clear that we had cut our units as much as we really could. I mean, so many of you were doing so much with less than you probably ever imagined that you could accomplish things with. So I did not see it as an option to think about how we'd handle our budget and taking any more. So we also looked inward, and we also looked at the feedback, and one of the things that we did hear a lot was the size of the dean's office and the level of layers in administration. And so we made a decision that we were going to make some significant cuts within the dean's office to address the budget issues and to allow our units to be able to continue in some of the things that they were trying to do to move forward. Now, that was a hard thing to do, and we ended up cutting several $100,000. We cut it's just all the way from staff positions to we're spending about half of what we did on associate deans at this point. And what it really raised a question of, though, is it's one thing to take those cuts on for us, but if it comes with less services to you, if it comes without the things that you need, then that's not a good strategy either. And that's where being really thoughtful about the place where we were and thinking about what are our priorities and what are the important things that the college needs and how do we align our office around that. And so that came with thinking about the priorities of student experience, supporting research, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this was kind of our guiding framework for how we thought about aligning the office. So we created associate dean positions around those roles. And I've had the pleasure of being able to be the direct contact. It's actually 57 units. And I've actually spent the last 3 weeks meeting with most of the chairs. And it's been the best academic experience I've had in my life because I have gotten to learn and understand all that goes into our wide range of units in ways that I hadn't before, and also to be able to problem solve with our chairs and directors, understand what's challenging, think about sharing things I learned from other chairs and directors, and really being kind of thoughtful detectives about how we go about this path forward. And so when you think about kind of pulling these things together, we really were thinking we had an opportunity at this point to be even more planful. Now, I realized when I've come in, there's a bit of, and this was in the feedback, fatigue in terms of things we've asked you to do, but particularly fatigue in terms of planning. And so when I realized that I thought we needed to do a strategic plan, I was really nervous. Now, I was a faculty member for 15 years. I didn't even know we had a strategic plan at Maryland. I couldn't care less. I didn't think it mattered to me. I actually once was given feedback from the chair that I should stop heckling him in a faculty meeting, so I think I'm probably getting what I deserve now. But this was still an opportunity, and I had gotten so much out of this idea of thinking about these priorities. And what we decided to do was to say, we didn't want to have you all do all the work at first. Because what usually happens in strategic planning is you all do all the work, and then it comes to the administrators, and maybe it ends up looking like you sent it us, but in most cases it doesn't. So it ends up becoming something different, and it doesn't feel like yours. So we took the opposite approach, and we spent a lot of time among our staff putting the work in to build the first real draft of the plan, but then we sent it out for 5 stages and 5 rounds of feedback. And the plan changed tremendously. And it got better, and I'll talk about this a few times, in some ways that were really astonishing to us. So we gained a lot out of putting the work in, but then allowing the community to be the ones who determined where it ended and how it kind of was in a place where it could lead us. And so in starting from there, we have, as I mentioned, the priorities with focusing on student experience, focusing on supporting research, and then weaving DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, into the fabric of the college. But we wanted to make sure that we were really focusing on all the various members of the college. So we focused on several areas of focus or themes, from undergraduates, graduate students, faculty, staff, and then also thinking about leadership and engagement both through the community and with our incredible resource of our alumni base. And so when we come to the different priorities, what's really important for us to think about, starting with student success, is how do we involve curriculum, teaching, the best kind of state-of-the-art advising we can, and hands-on experiences. And so one of the things about aligning the college around associate deans that had very specific roles was that each of the associate deans would be aligned with a particular aspect of these priorities. And so Paul Latchley had moved from a position that was really focused on online education now into really a comprehensive academic innovation and student success. And so working with college advising and student support, we just changed the name, so I was paranoid I was going to get it wrong, but then the College Office for Graduate Affairs, and then a new area that Sam Montague is leading in terms of outreach that would have online and outreach. So taking Sam's role and then Karen Leadham and Christine Lotta, we had a team around student success. And our guiding principle here was meeting students where they are. And what's most important about that is that doesn't happen with a reduction in rigor. It doesn't happen with a change in our mission. It's all the things that we care about in the liberal arts and sciences, but working with students where they are. And whether that's a change in format and thinking about semesters as more fluid, so it's not just the typical fall and spring, but winter courses, online courses, 8-week semesters, basically finding ways to allow students to still get the same challenge, but in ways that fit with things like the fact that most of our students work jobs outside of the classroom. For those students who work, many work upwards of 20 or 30 hours a week. So things have changed pretty dramatically, and we have a responsibility to be able to work with those students. And some of our units have been doing great work with this. I've been spending a lot of time with the math department, focusing on some bottleneck issues with algebra and calculus, and they've been developing enhanced sections of their courses and coming up with creative strategies of bringing in teaching specialists. It's actually, there's a lot of very positive things happening there, all the way to the winter term. And I mentioned this before. This is something that I really appreciate. And so it's an opportunity to have 3 or 4 weeks where you really focus on a single course. And we knew that that would have a lot of advantages in terms of giving students the ability to catch up if they've fallen behind, to focus on an individual course. But what we didn't realize was that 55% of the students who took the winter course came from the professional schools. And so this is an opportunity that for us to connect with students at a time when maybe they wouldn't have gotten that exposure to the arts and sciences. And so this is actually one of the ways in which we can use some of these innovations to start thinking about how do we not water down what we care about, but spread how we show that we care about the liberal arts and sciences. So when we think about this, it's also important to think about advising, and whether that's some of our great advisors like Kat McCreary, Amy Schmidt, Sydney Stone. The issue is they're spread too thin. We don't have enough advisors. We have not been able to invest in advising to give those individuals the opportunity to spend the quality time with students that we need. So part of the cuts that we made will go to advising. We've already been set to add 2 to 3 more, and then we're hoping to have an additional 2 to 3 more advisors next year. And that will have a very big impact. Or the professionalization of advising for graduate students from COGA is another opportunity to think about how we're able to use support to be able to provide students with what they need in terms of their progression. As you know, I'm a big proponent of our faculty mentoring program. We're now in our 3rd year. It always will have its challenges because we're working with the students who are struggling the most, but we continue to show that students who are a part of the program do better than students who are not, and something around a 0.75 increase in their GPA. And for every case where a student isn't really ready to receive help, we have lots of cases where mentors and students talk about how even just a few meetings, in some cases, in other cases, several meetings, have had a huge impact on their progression and how they feel about being here at KU. Sometimes it's what's gotten them to services that they need. I mean, I'm a psychologist, and I would be afraid to try to do that in that setting, but what we can do is get students to the services they need. If it's mental health issues, if it's financial issues. We had no idea how much financial issues were something that was affecting our students, and so this has been a good wake-up call for us and a way to think about how we align services towards that. And finally, the idea of having hands-on learning for the career paths that our students are interested in, and whether that's going into graduate school and being just like us as faculty, or whether it's a whole wide range of career paths that their experience here can have a big impact on, and whether that's internships or study abroad. And I was really excited to hear Mary Clater had done some fundraising, I think a Launch KU program where she made study abroad more accessible to students who otherwise couldn't afford to do this. That has a huge impact. We're doing a lot now in terms of planning to get our students more connected with young alumni. A lot of times alumni say, "Why'd you take so long to contact me?" And it's obviously at the point where they have more financial resources. But right now, they have a significant amount of time and a significant amount of talent. And that is an opportunity to help students and connect them with ways to think about their future. But the part that I think is most important is research. And you think we're at a Research One university, we think, okay, well, we've got that down, that's great. We're focusing on students and teaching and mentorship, but what we don't pay enough attention to is the way research makes the student experience better. The way that when we build up our faculty and our staff doing research and our graduate students and even our undergraduates, that it's those experiences, it's those resources that give students the kind of life-changing, transformative skills that might lead them into a faculty position or lead them into owning a company. And later they're going to talk about the project management skills that they learned, or they're going to talk about the creativity or their ability to communicate in writing. And that is an opportunity that we really can seize in thinking about not just our research, but the way the research can impact our students. And so that takes us to our faculty and the idea of supporting faculty research. Now, I mentioned before the strategic plan had changed a little bit over time, actually more than a little bit. One place was, I had originally written it as increase faculty productivity, increase grant activity, increase creative works. And several folks wrote and said, you have this completely, they weren't actually so nice in the way they wrote it, but I appreciate it. Where is the support that we will get to be able to do that? We can't, we are doing what we can. We need to be able to think about how, as a college, we can support our researchers. And then when that happens, those increases will naturally happen. And so we've actually changed around the priority to be around support for our faculty, support for research, and support in terms of building our infrastructure. So that was something that I found incredibly valuable and helpful. And part of that is because we already have faculty that are doing amazing things. So if you think about Michelle Leone and the kind of courageous one-woman show that she put on this summer talking about her experiences with cancer. If you think about Randall Jelks and Aisha Hardison and what they did with the Black Love Symposium over the past week. Actually, it seemed like it was the past 5 weeks. It was like brought scholars from all over the country to talk about an issue that really gets almost no attention. And I thought that point was made incredibly well through all the different events. And that's an opportunity for us to think about how we bring others to see the types of opportunities and the types of research accomplishments that we have here. Joanna Slutsky, 2 major awards. One is the Moore Inventor Award. The other I actually can't tell you, but in my day I was a pretty good researcher, and I applied for this about 5 times and never got through the first round. And she actually, this thing I can't tell you, has gotten this now too, and has just done an amazing job focusing on research on membrane proteins and how you can focus on this to treat cancer. Dave Tell, oh man. So I came late when Dave Tell was getting one of the Chancellor's Awards, and Dave Tell is like crying like crazy. I'm like, oh my God, did his family get hurt? Like what? Like what's going on? I was like seriously worried about him. And then I realized he was crying because he cares so much about his research. And then I felt like a jerk because I've never cried about my research. And what he's done in terms of bringing life to Emmett Till and those stories, it was just really great to see someone who cared so much about that. And so that was really impactful for me. Or Cecilia Menivar and what she's been doing in terms of immigration and particularly individuals who don't really know what's going to happen next to them and are constantly living in these moments of fear. And that's come out of her recent Carnegie Foundation award. Or people like Audrey Lamb and Mabel Rice and Holly Storkel and Rob Ward and Paul Hansen and Roberto de Guzman. Maybe you don't know how I put all these people together, but they're running training programs. Now, these are not the only folks doing it, but these are individuals. This is one of the hardest things you can do. It takes time, and it is an enormous contribution with almost no support. And so this is a spoiler, we've actually been able to try to give them some staff support, which is not nearly what they deserve, but for the first time that we're trying to pay attention to when we say something is really important, we have to make sure that we're providing the support behind it. Or thinking about ways in which we've added some other investments. And so last year we did the op-ed project. Jessica Beeson had run that and took faculty and gave them an opportunity to think about how they can take their scholarship and give it some real world impact. And then a few months later, Eric Scott actually had his op-ed published in the Washington Post. And it was a pretty interesting topic. It was looking at the Russian Revolution and history and how that has had this kind of long-term impact over refugee crises in that area now. And it was, just amazing that in that short time, he went from not really thinking about going in that direction to being able to get that as an impactful op-ed in the Post. Jamila Wansett-Thompson and her work on disparities and treatment intervention, and particularly in the way that applied behavioral sciences had collaborated with the college to be able to develop a kind of team grant writing support network that actually, Jamila was nice enough to say, had a big impact on her getting that grant. Or Hui Zhao, help me again. Zhao, Hui Zhao. I had it before, but then I lost it. Well, now I'm equally trouble talking about his research, but I will tell you, he had just talked to me about the way in which you talk about how different compounds can kind of sit on top of each other, and sometimes they won't, and they'll just kind of mesh into each other. And depending on how you arrange things experimentally, you can then create it so that they separate from each other, and you can kind of arrange things in a meaningful way. I didn't do that very well. I can see Hume's face, but the important point is what Hume did with this is said to me, he's doing some amazing work, but we need a theorist to work with him. We need to take what this experimentalist is doing, and we need to bring a theorist, and that's going to bring something totally different. That's the kind of support we need. We don't need any cheerleading. We need the ability to be able to create something different and unique here. And so I appreciate that we've had that opportunity to do that. I also appreciate what staff in the area study centers have done, staff like Cindy Sexton in psychology and the way that she advocates for other staff and talks about the needs and the ways in which we don't always pay attention to that in staff. For staff. Or, I've started getting up early. I've just changed and I'm now a morning person. I just did it one day. I was kind of surprised it worked. And so I come in early now, and so I've gotten to know the custodial staff in the building because they would do these amazing things for, now maybe it's because I'm the dean, I don't know, but I don't think so. I constantly was like running out of towels for my dry erase board. They would put those there. They would just kind of come up in the morning and talk to me, and they were actually really interested in what we were doing. And so when Bob and Trevor and Judy would ask about, what's the college doing, they really cared about it. And so we actually, I probably shouldn't, well, he's probably not watching this, we nominated Bob for Employee of the Month, and that was kind of a nice opportunity to kind of think about how folks who we normally don't see are actually having a really big impact in our ability to do what we want to do. Because honestly, it was a small thing, but it made a big difference for me. So we're not talking about saying, we have to raise this or do that. We're talking about how do we provide support. And so aligning our ADs, the associate deans, again, in this case, we have Joy Ward and Tamara Falikov, and they're now in the research associate dean position. So we have this for the arts and humanities, and we have this for the sciences. We're not splitting the college up. We're just merely saying sometimes you want a little help in the arts and sciences, sometimes you want it in the arts and humanities, sometimes in the sciences, sometimes both. So this gives an opportunity to think about how we can be interdisciplinary with the help of our associate deans. And the other nice thing is that they're able to focus on things we've been saying for a long time matter, but have been hard to do, like honorific awards. We have some of the best faculty in the world, and we don't apply for awards. I guess it's the Kansas humility, or I'm not sure what it is, but we just don't apply for awards the way other places do, so we don't get awards the way they do. We're thinking about ways that the ADs can support chairs, faculty members to be able to say, who are our best people, and let's make sure that we're promoting them. Or the Research Excellence Fund. So one thing you're not going to see from me are a lot of initiatives. I don't think that's my place to build these initiatives and take budget that you all have a pretty good plan about how you want to go about spending. I'm probably not going to do any cluster hires. Maybe in 3 years I do, and then we can show me this video, but I'm pretty certain I want your plans because they're good and they make sense, and you're already doing a great job in interacting with those. So when I do want to put an initiative together, I think we have a responsibility to raise the money for it. So we've raised $250,000 for this research fund. This will support a wide range of faculty, staff, graduate student, and particularly the inclusion of undergraduate students in research. And they'll have all, the kind of usual suspects like collaborative grants across 2 different labs or 2 different departments, or seed grants. But we also have this really interesting range that really cover the types of things that humanists and artists, I never thought about when an artist finds out that they're going to have a show and it's in a few days, they often have to pay out of pocket to get whatever their creative work is to that space. I don't think that should have to happen here. So that's a small amount of money that we can provide in a just-in-time way that you might provide it as you would see in the sciences. Or, what about for folks who get grants like NSF grants where they're not covering summer support, or you can't get a course release? That's a time where, we think of this almost as, we'll fill in the gap for what you should have gotten to be able to do that. And so these are the opportunities that they'll be rolling out in the next week, and they've put an amazing amount of work into it, so we're really excited about that. We'll also have research features where we're going to start plastering all your faces and amazing work all over the campus and make sure that we're not quite so humble, and really being able to talk about some of the great things that we're doing and really being able to promote that. And then finally, none of this really matters unless we have the best people here. And I am happy to say that with the cuts that we've made and with some of the creative things that we've done with units, some have involved getting advisory boards and fundraising involved, we're going to have between 50 to 55% more hires next year than the previous year. So that means that even though we're still kind of pulling ourselves out of these budget issues, we're taking steps to make sure that we're getting the folks back that will allow us to kind of shore up our units and then also build in strategic ways. And I did mention some of the issues with having new buildings, but if you're in the Earth, Energy, and Environment Center and you're a geologist, that's an amazing space with so many great teaching opportunities. The Interdisciplinary Sciences Building, that's another amazing space, a lot of chemists, some physicists, some biologists, some folks from pharmacy. And for Summerfield Hall, the renovation for film and media studies, an opportunity to have, well, really honestly, to get out of a space that probably was life-threatening was probably the biggest thing. But to now have a space that actually can really allow you to work together and promote your work is really exciting. Third issue, or the third priority in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think we've worked really hard in terms of taking this seriously and putting our budget where our mouth is. We created the first ever associate dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the college, and we made this a faculty position and a scholar position. And so Jennifer Hamer was in that role, and as you know, has done some amazing things. I wish she wasn't quite so good, because then the provost office wouldn't have poached her. But now it gives us an opportunity to hire again, and so we'll be bringing someone in for that position for the spring semester. And I think that's a really good opportunity for us to kind of look at what some of our accomplishments have been, but also there's a lot that we still need to do. In fact, there's many, many things we still need to do. But one place where we have had a real impact, again, in terms of people, in our hires last year, those that were authorized at the start of the hiring period, 55% of the hires were individuals from a minority group, and 33% are from an underrepresented group. If you look at the distribution of minority inclusion among our faculty, this is night and day. I mean, this is tremendously different. Now, I don't want to take too much credit, because we still have a long, long way to go. But what we've done here is we've really used our budget, and we've really found ways to build pipelines, and really found ways to support units in finding folks who share these values, bring this diversity, and also have excellence in the teaching and the research that they bring to our campus. So this is something we have to really keep pushing on, but I think that we are certainly taking it seriously. Now, I will say, when I brought the idea of a strategic plan to the units, there was a lot of skepticism, and that's just what I heard, so I can just imagine what I didn't hear. But our units have put together really great plans. And I just want to tell you some of the things that units have been talking about doing or have already started. So in terms of undergraduates, physics is putting together an undergraduate conference for women in physics. AAAS, so African and African American Studies, is doing this really interesting thing where they're intentionally scheduling and coordinating their courses among faculty so that they're able to ensure that students have the ability to get the courses that they need to progress in their major, and to be able to make sure that they have good coordination among their faculty. Linguistics is developing curriculum that will be appealing to language majors. So being able to think about how we expand the kind of basic research aspect of linguistics towards a more broad sense of language pedagogy, and then also essentially language outreach. German is doing some amazing stuff with building research competencies into their course curriculum. So they're taking this idea of research makes the student experience better really seriously. And so, if not already, pretty soon they will be able to say that research is an integrated piece of what their students are getting from the time they get here. In terms of our graduate students, Clinical Child has done some amazing work in terms of developing a grant culture among their students. Now, you can't just say write more grants. It's providing support, providing mentorship, working together, building teams, giving students the kind of motivation, but also the confidence to write their grants. And English has really worked hard to develop preparatory material, whether you're going into an academic job or whether it's an alt career. So this really provides students, maybe sometimes for the first time, with a sense that whatever career they go into, we are going to support them. So in terms of faculty, ecology and evolutionary biology have started to think really deeply about how they build their pipeline of faculty candidates so they can increase diversity in a field that doesn't always have the type of diversity we would want to see. Visual arts has trying to redefine the role of a visiting artist and what that means to bring a scholar to their department and have impact in ways that affect students and that affect their creative works. In terms of promoting our faculty research, dance has started to think about ways where they can coordinate faculty courses and think about when their performance schedules are, because they're, part of their field is performing in other places. And if you're teaching and you're performing, that doesn't always work. So thinking about ways to work together to be able to ensure students get the great experience they should, but also they're able to do the performance and to be able to do performance in the way that will have the most impact. The Center for East Asian Studies is starting to think about creative ways to look at funding, and as kind of our things become a bit more uncertain, they're taking some real risks. And geology has done a lot of work in terms of peer mentoring. They have these great active classrooms coming online, being able to work together and how they can really improve courses like Geology 101, but really help them come to life by having faculty work together in their mentoring. In terms of staff, theater has a program together where they create a circuit of mentorship for their staff, so it's not just about a single mentor. We know this is kind of best practices for faculty, so they're adding this now in terms of their staff mentorship. Spanish is developing strategies to look at long-term career sustainability among their staff. In terms of leadership and outreach, French, Francophone studies, and Italian is building immersion programs so that they can collaborate and really support middle and high schools in terms of being able to develop that early language proficiency and interest. The Center for STEM Research is thinking about how we take research here on campus and have it make an impact outside of campus. Speech, language, and hearing has always been a great model in terms of building a leadership bench. How do we think about who those next leaders are? How do we work with ensuring that each individual who takes that leadership role is ready to do it? And molecular biosciences is doing a lot to think about how to get alumni early in their time after leaving KU and get them really invested in the future of the department. So these are a variety of things that we've kind of struggled through, a variety of ways in which we can move forward. I never would have thought in a million years that I would lead a strategic plan. I just never thought that way. I thought, honestly, these are things that go on a shelf and they're never used. The best executive committee meeting we had as a leadership team was when we started to go through the plan and talk about what are the metrics, what are the things we care about, not because we're setting these outrageous and silly goals, but because we actually want to hold ourselves accountable. We actually want to think about how do we measure these things. And the next time we say, we want to be this, we first want to say, well, what are we doing to support that? What are we doing to accomplish that? So we're willing to make some difficult choices. We're willing to work hard. And we really want to be part of a broader college community that is not, I'll just say it frankly, a victim of the circumstances that we're in, but is actually active and is actually taking steps to be planful and to think about where we want to go and then to put those things into place with the resources that we need to do it. So that is the end of the presentation. So thank you for listening. And for questions, a few requests. If you raise your hand, we'll bring you a microphone. We actually have two. If you would, state your name, your title, and your department or program. And one question at a time. If you really want to ask 5, that's okay, but let me answer them one at a time is the only thing I ask. So.
Good afternoon, Chancellor, Dean, and everyone else. My name is Rodney Chai. I'm a graduate student in atmospheric science. So I thank you, Dean, for sharing with us the strategic plan. I mean, sometimes I have to say, as a graduate student, sometimes you feel a little bit detached from what the college and the university is doing because you are so involved in your research and daily teaching responsibilities. So, my question to you is, Dean, there's a lot of emphasis on diversity and engagement with minority groups and groups that might feel vulnerable on campus. So my question is, what are the efforts of, we are building so many, there's so much construction on campus, so we have world-class infrastructure, but what about educating people, getting people from across different departments or like different backgrounds to come together and talk about things? Because I've attended quite a few events that are entitled multicultural events, and while I have great discussions within these closed, safe spaces, sometimes I wonder if people of different viewpoints can also sit in, and we can have a real discussion, have a difficult discussion about issues that touch our hearts every day. And we talk about students' experience, but when you once you walk out of your building, you walk to your car. Sometimes I don't feel safe on campus. And so I wonder, so I it's more like kind of like a invitation to think more critically about what we really mean by multicultural, because it's not just a group of minority students. It should not be just a group of minority students gathering together, but it should really be truly inclusive by including everyone and people who don't necessarily agree with you.
Right. So, well, I appreciate your question. When I think about the early conversations I would have with Jennifer Hamer as the associate dean in this role, part of what we do is diversity, but a bigger piece of what we do is equity. The idea that we have to have clear policies and procedures, the fact that we have to think very proactively about what are going to be the right learning experiences. How do we create these conversations that you're talking about and not being afraid to do that? I think we need to do more of it, but this is something that within the scope of diversity, the idea that that there's a right answer, which I think is maybe a little bit what you're getting at, is not where we're going. We want to have these conversations. We want to encourage. I think a lot of our faculty are very good at bringing out, or at least many of them are bringing out these conversations. So, it will always be a challenge to ensure that all voices are heard, and it starts to become, there is a line that I don't always know the answer to, where it's, where there's this idea of what your free speech is, what you're able to say versus what are things that infringe on others' rights or their sense that they even deserve to be here. And we don't always have all the answers for that, but we're thinking deeply about it. We're trying to create events that will work through that. We want to support UNIT's ability to do that. And so working with our chairs and directors to actually have this happen at our unit level, the way that we train our GTAs. We're putting a lot of thought and time into it. I just think these are hard questions, and I think we take the accomplishments in diversity really seriously, so that's why I'm speaking about it. But this has to be something that impacts everyone that's here, and when you talk about equity and when you talk about inclusion, that really does include everyone, and so we're putting a lot towards trying to do that. But thanks.
Thank you. I appreciated that previous question, and I think that something you said earlier has to be folded into that. You talked about sort of Kansas niceness, and I think that actually does require a kind of cultural change, that we are a place. I'm not from Kansas. I've been 20 years, but I'm not a Kansan in that sense. And I do have always felt that we don't like to talk about certain things. And so they relegate them to, it's a humanities discussion, it's not a science discussion. So it doesn't bother us as much over here as it does over there. And I think that is a real challenge that we face. How do we get past a way of being that has maybe kept us in our silos for so long, and therefore we don't talk to each other across. Students who care about it more will talk about it, and that might end up being a particular group of students. So, I don't envy your job, But I do think the cultural shift is absolutely something we have to talk about. And it's hard to do it because you've been doing it the same way for so long. But with regard to that, I think it really is about a different way of being. And I just know that I see it all the time. Sometimes we make a little step forward and then we drop back into our old style. So it's not so much a question, but it is, how do you see opening up conversations that people really don't want to have because they're hard. And, you have to face stuff that you don't want to look at, so.
Yeah. Well, first, I'm just trying to get over the fact you didn't ask a question about concealed carry. So now that we're past that, one of the things that I actually learned from Jennifer Hamer was the importance of getting people in a room. And so we've put together events bringing graduate students, undergraduates together to just have conversations, to actually start creating those environments where those can happen. We also, based on a realization that, when I did some of the I'll bring in concealed carry, when doing some of the concealed carry forums, that maybe we hadn't done enough in training students for difficult conversations. And so Jennifer has put something together with faculty and staff that would actually say, listen, we need to actually address these issues. We need to try. We need to struggle through this. And this would be a way to build this into coursework. This would be a way to build this into department culture. That's, I think, where strategic planning can actually be really helpful. If we say this is a goal, how do we then sit down together and walk through what would be the tactics to get us there? What would be the way we measure whether it works or not? I don't know if we have to call that strategic planning. It's just basically saying, what's the difference between saying we need to do this versus actually being able a year from now to say, here's how we did it, here's where we fell short, here's what we can do different, and here's where we've moved forward. So I think this is actually a great kind of issue that strategic planning could work really well with.
Hi, I didn't want to let the opportunity go by to let everyone who doesn't already know that the space that you're sitting in right now, the Commons, is intended for this very specific thing that we're talking about. People to come together from different perspectives, different disciplines, different specializations, and have a conversation like we're doing right now. And we are here, and we work a lot with the college to be a vehicle for this kind of thing. So please don't think that you don't have that resource, and continue to use us for this kind of thing.
I'm Leitu Erasmus Campbell with the Anthropology Department. I'm an office manager. I just wanted to thank both of you. Dr. Gerard, I worked at the KU Med Center campus, so I've got to feel what it's like to be on both campuses. I think this is the first time ever in my 25 years that we are actually being considered as one campus and not two. I loved your email, how you addressed the patient-centered model and trying to adapt that to the Lawrence campus as well. My question is, would they consider doing like mentorship from the Med Center to the Lawrence campus? Because some of the things, from my understanding is talking to students, they're always seen as the professional schools over there. We're seen as the main campus, but not the doctor programs and nursing and all that. But I was just wondering, because they have great mentors over there, just from what I've seen in research, if they could have some of that come to the Lawrence campus and maybe like back and forth, get your strong leaders to work with each other.
Yeah, thank you for that. I guess the answer is yes. But it's a two-way street. I think there are tremendous assets on this campus as well that the Med Center could benefit from. So I really think it's a matter of putting our collective heads together, figuring out best practices at both places and starting to share those. Because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. When we have programs that are working well, And just listening to the number of initiatives that you were rattling off, I mean, there's going to be some really exciting things that come out of some of those that we need to figure out how to share much more broadly. And I think we've been guilty of doing that, not only just campus to campus, but even silos within campuses. And so how we figure out to leverage and scale some of these exciting initiatives that I think will develop into best practices, we need to figure out how to do that. And I would say we've just started our thinking at the university level about, not to bring up the dirty words of strategic plan, but at some point we're going to have to do another one here. But I love the way that you did it, and that's really how we just did it at the Med Center. I just had that team over here last week talking with Neeli Bendapudi about can we leverage some of what they did over there in a broader sense as an example of how we can start to share across campuses. But I'm acutely aware of that, and I think my job is to try and draw those connections wherever I can between them so we can leverage those because we do have just tremendous resources on both sides. But we haven't done a very good job of taking advantage of those.
And then, of course, there's Edwards. And so being able to think about how we think across all three campuses. And so it was just something as simple as Dave Cook said, hey, can you send us the strategic plan? And so we did, and they sent back a ton of great material, things that actually we included, things where they talked about how they might be able to partner with that. And so we've actually identified a lot of things just out of being able to look at what they thought of our plan and where they thought they could add things. So if we could think about how to do that across all three and have, without it being too much of strategic planning, but just ways in which we could really articulate what's happening at each place, we could certainly do that.
Hi, I'm Rosemary O'Leary, the director of the School of Public Affairs and Administration. I grew up in this area and left at age 28 and then came back 28 years later. So there's no place like home. Great to be back. But one thing that has struck me now that I've been here almost 5 years is how inward looking we are. And I think our motto is a great place to be, something like that, where Penn State's is explore the world. Is there a way that we can both serve the people of the state of Kansas and yet encourage internationalization and ideas and thinking outside of our enclave here? And I think this fits with the first comment and the second comment too. I would love to see us be way more international because as we know, even Western Kansas farmers are highly affected by the global economy.
Yeah, and we have lots of strengths here. We have our area study centers, we have the School of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, and the way that they both have a lot of resources and opportunity to be able to provide outreach throughout the state, but then also to help us think about how we are preparing our students for things beyond Kansas. There's also Global and International Studies, which is one of our fastest growing majors. We're putting together some ideas now where we'll be able to bring a variety of departments and units whose work actually ties in really well to that, to be able to expand the scope and the depth of what's offered in that program. That's exactly the kind of opportunity that allows students to have a sense of those bigger pictures. And then, of course, there's the hands-on experience. There's study abroad, where I said I wasn't going to bring this up because we're still early on, but this idea of also doing study away, where we would, right now, just even try to identify opportunities that are not right here in Lawrence, but aren't necessarily, particularly for students who may not have the financial resources to do this, aren't necessarily an expensive trip into another country, but where can we provide those opportunities to get us pushing our boundaries and thinking deeper just within the US. And so trying to think about ways to create those hands-on experiences, whether it's kind of the traditional ways that we do it, or whether it's through some new ways. I mean, I'm looking at Sarah Lynn and thinking about what the Spencer Art Museum can help us do in terms of these things. So again, I think I would love to see then for SPA, identifying this within one of the goals that your unit would be particularly great about, being able to say, okay, here's something we care about. We can support the entire college in the way that we're leaders here. So I think that'll be great.
Hi, thanks for the conversation to everyone and the presentations. I'm Betsy Esch. I'm Associate Professor in the Department of American Studies. I was, along with Mary Emma, one of a number of faculty members who spent a lot of last year driving back and forth to Topeka to testify in front of various legislative bodies and to meet with various elected officials to talk about the absurdity of having concealed carry on our campuses. And I was joined by a range of voices on this campus, and very excited then when we had the announcement that we would be having a chancellor joining us from the medical school, whose efforts were actually successful in getting guns repealed from the KU medical campus. So I'd like to know, what's our strategic plan for getting this law reversed, getting the exemption put back in place so that we no longer have to welcome concealed carry on our campus, which has directly to do with the question posed moments ago in a very specific way, which is, if you don't know, if you are an international student, staff, or faculty at KU, you do not have the right to carry under federal law, regardless of your age or Kansas residency. So this is, even if we only want to talk about it in terms of problematics for meeting our other parts of our strategic plan, this is a problem for us. And so I'd really like to hear some specific thoughts on how we might, as a community, begin that process. We know that 70 to 82% of people in our community opposed guns being welcome on campus. I suspect those numbers have not gone down and would imagine they've gone up. But anyway, all the arguments that were in place at the medical school about the unique concerns faced. I heard trauma nurses go and testify in Topeka incredibly profoundly, just as I heard our own faculty and our own graduate students testify about the problems, our unique problems as a campus, and those haven't gone away. So when we talk about the stresses on students in terms of hours of working, when we talk about mental illness, when we talk about drug and alcohol abuse, we don't even have to get into the specter of the problem of mass violence in the United States. We can just talk about the unique problems that our students face.
Doug, do you want to talk about the
Sure.
med school first?
We could probably talk about it for an hour and a half appropriately. So our strategy has been obviously working predominantly behind the scenes. If you aren't aware, we actually are not allowed by law to advocate around guns, for or against. There's a state law against that. If you are a state employee, you cannot be involved in this conversation in a public fashion. So you won't see us on the front page of the newspaper talking about this. That doesn't mean we aren't very active around this. And even much of the effect that we had at the medical center was because the hospital could talk about it, even though the university couldn't. And so, and it was really the mental health hospitals that tipped scales at the end of the day that got us over the finish line with that one. Having said that, if you talk to legislators, they are not happy with, a significant number of them are not happy with where we're at. And so there is a big movement to revisit this issue. It's not going to be easy, and it's particularly not going to be easy in election year, which we're about to head into. So I am concerned that we probably won't see a whole lot of activity this year because it's election year. And it most likely will be the following year that we'll see something really start to come up from a groundswell. But there is a groundswell to readdress this issue. We will continue to provide the information as you did in every forum that we're asked to do so, and when we're asked, we can respond. We're certainly allowed to do that. We're certainly allowed to talk as private citizens as well, and many of us have. And it is impactful, so we're collecting the data. I mean, we're probably somewhere between 30 and 40 students right now that did not come to KU. They told us because of this. Those are just the ones that told us. So we know it is impacting us. Not to mention all the angst and appropriate anxiety that's on a campus around this. So, I think we will see more conversation around it. I can't really tell you how it's going to play out, except that it will continue to be a significant topic for us.
And, from our perspective in the college, we've always supported faculty, students, staff sharing how they feel about this. I mean, that has been important. And so that is more important to me than trying to conform in every way to what are the things that we're being told as administrators. I understand what I'm saying when I say that. I also understand that for many people, they would want to see people like me, people like the chancellor at the legislature, taking a public stand about this. And I'll just be really honest, from my perspective, I don't think my role here is the one that can do that. And I think I have, and I'm just, maybe I don't need to do this, but I've taken some very strong stands since I've been here. I mean, I've had people question my leadership, question my morality, question all kinds of things because I have not been willing to do that. And I've done it strategically because I think that's what's in the best interest of our faculty and our people. There's other things where I've, as I've said, taken very strong stands because I thought it would be most effective. So if there is a movement where we are able to take if some things start to change, if the campus leads in one direction, the college will be there. But at this point, I mean, I do struggle all the time with what's the right answer. And now at this level, now we have questions about office hours and, in your classrooms. And it's been my perspective to say, let's figure out how do we ensure that we're doing what's in the best interest of the students. Let's start with that first, and if we're able to kind of move forward with that, then that would be okay with me.
If I may, you now have a group of faculty who are extremely learned on the history of this issue in the state, precisely because we spent so much time in Topeka last year, including the origin of the law that is used here to say that administrators can't talk because they're state funded. That was not the original intent of that law's passage. So I would strongly urge the convening of a committee of faculty and graduate students who wish to be involved in a conversation about how to move forward, if not this legislative season, although it strikes me there are probably unique opportunities because it's an election year in the coming years. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Victor Akajanian, Department of Sociology, Center for Migration Research. Can you talk a little bit more about your strategic priorities for faculty hiring? You talked about that you expect an increase in about 50-55% increase. What are the criteria? How do what are the priorities for hiring? Is it filling gaps due to attrition or retirement, departmental rankings, or promise of external funding, those kind of things? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think in such a broad college, it's impossible to say that we have one formula that we would apply. I think the way that we go about it is to consider how each unit looks with its aspirational peers. What are the things that those disciplines respect? What are those things that are moving the field forward? In some cases, units have had so many losses that we have to just support the kind of structure of those units by making some hires, but we want to be able to think about how can we build strengths? And we're not going to ever be the size we were. So we're not going to be able to go back to everything that we had before. And so units that are talking about, well, we had this at one point, we'd like to have that again, that's just harder to get motivated about. Now, obviously, grant funding matters, but only in some areas. And in those areas where it's really crucial for you to have funding to run your lab, to support your students, then those things are going to matter. In other units where what matters are impactful books and being able to be public intellectuals and move the field forward, then that's what will matter there. So we look more at kind of disciplines and what are the things that matter in those disciplines, and then what are the units that are being creative with the resources they have, units that are doing joint hires in places where this makes sense when you just simply have fewer bodies, being able to have impacts across units will be really valuable. I know it's tempting to want to have that formula, but at the same time, I think we have a pretty good sense of what are the units that are the ones that are always having an impact on students. What are the units that their faculty are getting awards, that they're getting invited to give talks, that they're moving the field forward. So, I actually doesn't feel that complicated when we're in that moment. I feel, and that's why, so now we announce to all the chairs what are the hires that we made, what are the ones we didn't, because it feels pretty reasonable to me in terms of having a sense of why we're doing it. But unfortunately, we're just not going to use something like academic analytics and say, okay, this is the number and this is how we do it. Student credit hours matter to some extent, but it's definitely not a one-to-one ratio. If it was, that would actually be hurting the college considerably. But what we care more about, it's less about how many student credit hours do you bring in, but what are the ways in which you're building your curriculum? What are the ways in which you are taking areas within your discipline that are important and that you're ensuring that you're able to meet students' ability to be competitive in job markets and those sorts of things. So it's really about the individual argument that chairs are able to make as opposed to some larger metric. And I'm a social scientist. I wish it was about a metric, but I could kind of give you one and that would feel safe, but I don't think it would be genuine. Okay, well, thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.